Welcome to 10 Design Principles We Can Learn from Game Design. Before we get going, thank you very much to all the sponsors. I don't know if there are any sponsor representatives in here. These guys make this stuff possible, so I'm very happy about that. It's quite expensive and a big mission to put these things on, and these guys really came. So if you haven't spoken to these guys, just go say hello, how's it, say thanks for coming, and then I'll do it again next year. We can do this all again. Right. So who am I? My name is Roderick Modlin. You can call me Odd. My friends call me Odd. I'm a principal consultant at Ultron Carabiner, and I work in the digital workplace, digital workspace. That's what we're calling it today. Next week, Microsoft will change the messaging again, and I'll get a new job title and whatever. I started in SharePoint about 10 years ago. And I've been working with those sorts of tools. Like I did Access back in the day and that sort of stuff. My particular favorite thing to do is forms and workflow, BPM, that sort of stuff. I worked a lot with like InfoPath and SharePoint workflow. I loved InfoPath, it was awesome. Nintex, I've done lots of Nintex work, and at the moment I'm loving the hell out of Power Apps. I don't know if you guys have used Power Apps, it is the best. Like, it is so cool. You can make an app in 5 minutes, push a button, and it goes to everybody's phones. Your entire organization just has it. Just like that. You don't have to deal with the Play Store. You don't have to get Apple to approve your bullshit. You just do it. Sorry. Does anybody mind if I swear in this? I'm going to be blue. I generally try not to, but I'm foul. I'm sorry. I have a blog on modlin.wordpress.com. There is some technical stuff on there recently, mostly about Power Apps and Flow and stuff. There's also a lot of just random geekiness, which I am a massive nerd, and we'll get into that in a moment. I also theoretically do a weekly podcast with Alistair Pugin called Two Guys in SharePoint. You get it at twoguysInSharePoint.co.za. And we talk about the digital workplace, right? Office 365, we do news, we have interviews. There hasn't been one in a little while because Al's been running around to New York and organizing all of this sort of thing, so we haven't done a bunch of that. And occasionally I'll tweet at oddmodlin. Again, these are not purely technical feats. Two Guys in SharePoint, we will mostly only talk about the digital workplace and Office 365. The other ones are filled with a lot of my nerdy stuff as well, so you might want to pick and choose over the cases. So, I'm probably the biggest nerd in this room. I am a huge nerd. I say probably because I said that a couple of years ago in Joburg, and one of the dudes was like, I went to GDC, which is a big board gaming conference in the States. So he flew specifically for that. And we had to later go into the parking lot and had a nerd off. It was so I'm probably the biggest nerd in the room. And for the majority of the stuff that I really enjoy is I'm an analog gamer. So what I mean by analog gamer is I don't really play computer games, right? I do have a few that I particularly enjoy. I did World of Warcraft for a very long time. I'm sober 5 years, I think. And I play Minecraft. World of Warcraft will take over your life. Yes. But I play a lot of analog games. So board games, pen and paper role-playing games, that sort of stuff. Board games are particularly fascinating for me because like you've got a lot of design constraints, and the people playing it have to take on all the cognitive load. When on a computer, the computer takes most of the cognitive load, right? So that's an interesting thing. But I'm an analog gamer, and this presentation is going to be bringing a lot of that, right? So for this presentation, you guys are all going to go on a journey with me. And that journey starts with this man. This man is one of my favorite people on the planet. Like, if I could meet this guy one day. This is Mark Rosewater. He is one of the most enthusiastic and passionate people ever. You can find him talking about stuff online. He does a podcast. In the main, though, Mark Rosewater is the lead designer of a game called Magic the Gathering. You might have heard of Magic the Gathering, right? But I'll give you a little praise here. I'm not going to go in depth in this presentation about how the game works and stuff, but to give you a high-level overview, right? So it's the world's first and most successful TCG. So it's a trading card game, right? Trading cards, like Americans have baseball cards, right? The trading cards, but it's also a game, right? It wasn't invented by Mark Rosewater, but he's currently the lead designer, has been for many years. And the game is amazing. It's got around 25 million players, they estimate now. This year, they've got a $10 million prize pool for the Pro League. So people play this professionally. $10 million prize pool is pretty good. We're excited about it becoming a proper e-sport. I say e-sport, it's still mainly paper-based, right? Although there are some nice apps. Over the 25 years of Magic's history, they've created more than 10,000 unique cards, right? Because each card does a different thing. And the design team put out 4 new sets a year. So 4 times a year, they release new cards into the game. Each of those sets has more than 300 different cards. And when they release these sets, they have to balance them for a bunch of different ways of playing. So there's a lot of different ways you can play Magic, right? You get the pro players who are playing at a very high competitive level, and there's a bunch of different formats that they play competitively, where you're using just the new cards, or you're using old cards as well, or all of the cards. And then you can draft, where you play only with a small bunch of things. And then you get more casual gamers, where they just want to play for fun, and there's a bunch of different things there. So when they're designing for this game, they need to please all of those different people, right? When they're designing, they need to design for all those different use cases, which is quite challenging, right? So when they're designing Magic the Gathering, right? Magic the Gathering is a game with a very large user base. 25 million people, lots of people playing this game, right? It's a very complicated system. Each card they print has the rules on it, and it interacts with all the other cards they've ever printed, right? So it's very complicated. When you're designing, you have to make sure that you're not breaking things, you're not breaking these systems. And it's undergoing continuous change, right? The players come up with new strategies, and you're releasing new cards 4 times a year. So we've got a large user base, using a very complicated system that is undergoing continuous change. Does this sound familiar to anybody? It sounds a lot like Office 365, right? That describes what we do. We've got a very complicated system, lots of different tools, lots of people using it, and it's changing all the time. The amazing thing about Mark Rosewater and his team is that they deliver exceptional design every time they release a product. Like, in terms of game design, they are absolute masters at this. Industry-wide, anywhere you go in gaming, it is acknowledged that they do an absolutely phenomenal job. Not that they don't miss the ball somewhere or other, but it's never drastic, right? They really do that, and they have never missed a deadline. 25 years of making Magic, releasing 4 sets a year, under all of these constraints, they have never missed a shipping deadline. I don't know that any one of us can say that. I know I can't. So, what does that mean for us? Well, Mark Rosewater, they also call him Marrow, had a great quote. Design is design regardless of what is being created. I really like that quote. I'm a big fan of what I've been thinking about as intellectual cross-training. You familiar with the idea of cross-training? Sports people sort of think about it like Phelps is a great swimmer, but when he's training, he doesn't just swim. You know, he does running and he lifts weights and stuff. It's not related exactly to what he does, but the benefits he gets out of that translates to what he does. And I think that's the same with anything we do. Nothing that we do is worthless, right? Whatever we do teaches us something, and we can use that in anything else. And that's what this means, right? Design is design regardless of what's being created. And he said this in a talk he gave at GDC, the Global Design Congress, where he talked about some stuff, and I'm cribbing off him here. So, go with me on this journey, right? So that's Mark Rosewater. Mark Rosewater gave a talk about this man. Nobody recognizes this guy. We've got no designers in the room, graphic designers. This man is Dieter Rams. Okay, he was a German industrial designer. He was one of the moving forces in the functional school of design, right? He worked for Braun. He designed radios and that sort of stuff. And he came up with 10 principles of design. Mark Rosewater gave a talk about the Dieter Rams' 10 principles of design and how they're related to magic. Another person who was really a big fan of these 10 principles of design was Jonathan Ive, right? He was the chief designer of Apple. He's the guy who invented the iPod. He came up with the whole design for the iPhone, that whole aesthetic that so much drives how we expect things to look and work now, right? A lot of those are based on these principles of Dieter Rams' 10 design principles. So what I'm going to do in this talk today is we're going to go through those 10 design principles. I'm going to show you what Mark Rosewater thought of those principles as they're related to magic design, to their game design, and then we're going to see if we can apply those to Office 365. Right. I think this is quite a good thing. That's why I say I'm not going to give you a technical demo. Right? I could show you, here's a cool thing you can do in Teams. 6 months from now, that cool thing is old hat. Maybe doesn't work anymore. You got some use out of it. But I think these design principles can help us think about Office 365, how we implement it, how we design our solutions, and can make us better designers and give us better products at the end of the day. This is a bit more of a philosophical discussion. Sound good? Happy days. So, what are the 10 principles? First up, good design is innovative, makes a product useful, it's aesthetic, it helps us understand the product, it's unobtrusive, it's honest, it's durable, it's consequent to the last detail, it's concerned with the environment, and good design is as little design as possible. So what we're going to do in the next half an hour or so is we're going to run through all of these, and we'll see how we can sort of apply them and how that can shape our thinking. I will, on my blog, put up a PDF of this presentation. It's not hell of a useful. Like the discussion we're going to have, I think, is more useful. But hopefully I am also recording it. We'll see if that actually works. And maybe it'll be up on YouTube. Cool. Shall we get going? First up, good design is innovative. So how this is going to work, we're going to go through each one of the principles. I'm going to talk about what Mark Rosewater said about Magic the Gathering, and then we're going to apply it to Office 365. So, first up, every set, Mark Rosewater said, must do something that hasn't been done before, right? We want to innovate. Every set should find ways to add new elements to old ideas, and every set should create a moment that's uniquely its own. So that's what he means about magic. When they want to be innovative, they want to give the players something new. It's got to be something that hasn't been done before. They should use the new elements that they've got in that design to do old things, and have something that's uniquely its own. So what does that mean for us in Office 365? Well, in O365, innovation is easy, right? Microsoft has handled that for us. These tools are really good, right? They are constantly bringing out new things, new experiences, new ways to use them. So the innovation part of this is theoretically quite easy, right? New tools, new experiences, got new ways of working, which can be quite challenging. Changing the way people work can be a challenge. The big thing I want to take away here is solutions should provide something that the client hasn't had before. Right? If you're just going in to a department, or if you're a consultant, you're going to a client, and you say like, okay, you were doing it this way, do it this way instead. That doesn't give any benefit to those people. Like, I'm doing the same thing. Why did I go through this whole process? Why did I learn a new thing? It has to give them something that they haven't seen before. So we always have to innovate for them. And I quite like the idea, as Mara said, every set should find ways to add new elements to old ideas. I like using new tools to improve old processes. So there are many processes in business, and this is the way we do it. And we've done it this way for 100 years. And it's very inefficient and it's very time consuming, and often people don't like that part of their jobs, right? This is that this is a problem for us. And we can use the tools to say, okay, this is how you've done your process. We can use this to improve how you've done it before. Make sense? Innovation, I think, is the easy one for us in O365. I don't think any of us question that. So, good design makes a product useful. So, from the magic side, Maro said he's a big believer in form follows function. Right? So, it's all about that function. We want to make this product useful. So, in the game, their function is quite easy. Like, it's a game. The game is supposed to be fun. So that is always their central driving principle. So that's what he took it to mean. Like, it must be useful, so it must be fun, because it's a game. It says, too often a designer can get lost in the intricacies of making a card work that they lose sight of what they're making the card for in the first place. It's quite a technical thing, these magic design, and you can get caught up in all the little minutiae of making this card, and it turns out not to be fun at all. And then you've missed the point, right? Because the purpose of the game is to be fun, so everything you design for it has to be fun. For us, the function is a little more difficult, right? What are we trying to accomplish? So when we're building a solution, when we're implementing a new technology, when we're onboarding Office 365, what we have to always ask ourselves is, what is the function of the solution? What am I actually trying to accomplish here? Because we can lose sight of that, right? We get cool new tools. Oh, we've got Kazala now, we've got Power Apps. Let's go do Power Apps. It's the wrong way to approach it. The first thing you have to decide is, what are we doing? What is the function of the solution that I'm building? So we should constantly re-examine from the beginning, what are we doing? And then throughout the build process, right, keep going back to that. What is that function? Am I still serving that function? Because I've worked on projects, I know, where you have a big complicated system that you're building, right? Maybe you're building an asset management system or whatever, and you get 6 months deep, and you've had like this little bit, and oh, can't we do that? And oh, I'd rather have it look like this, and maybe that. And when you get to the end of the day, the thing that you've built doesn't actually accomplish the function that they were looking for at the beginning. When you started it, you wanted, okay, I want a thing that can capture this information and report off of it. At the end of the day, it sort of does that, but it also lets you do this other thing. You can order lunch and it'll make you coffee and all of that. It's not a very good design because it doesn't actually accomplish what you were looking for in the beginning. And it's very easy to get off track there, okay? I mean, that is also, a part of that is also project management, right? And avoiding scope creep. And that sort of thing. And scoping is very important. And it all comes down to that central question of what is that function, and then making sure that you re-examine it all the way through that process to say, okay, every step of the way we are serving that function. We're going to make a product that's useful to the users. Sound good? Not have it complicated. Good design is aesthetic. And this is also a bit of a weird one. So Maro says, when perceiving things, humans care a great amount about if the object in question feels right. Right? Aesthetics is something that's often quite difficult for the more technically minded because it's not a science. A lot of it is quite airy-fairy. So to illustrate what I mean, one of the things I mean by aesthetics, I will show you a magic card. This is a magic card called Obstinate Bailoff. It's a big green creature. It's actually it's got some niche applications in competitive play. I really like the design of a magic card. It's quite evocative, and it's got so much information on it. It's nice and clean, but it's got a lot of information on it. I'm not going to point out all of you, and I've actually got a really cool t-shirt that breaks out the different pieces of a magic card, but we're not going to get into that. What I want to point out is something like this. So here we have the casting cost, 2 green, so it has a total casting cost you have to pay 4 of your resources to play the spell. When you do, it's going to gain you 4 life, and it's got power 4 and toughness 4, right? And that feels pretty good. Like, I just have to take it from me as a Magic player. Like, it sort of feels rounded out, and you're paying 4 and getting 4, and it's a 4/4. It sort of works out for us. So that's what we mean by feel. It's not just the actual mechanical pieces of it. It's about how people perceive it. So in Office 365, Graphic design is important, right? A lot of us are devs and very technical people, and we're like, nah, it's fine. Graphic design is important. It does have an impact on user adoption. It's maybe not the biggest impact on user adoption, but if something looks like ass, people are going to have a hard time adopting it. Thankfully, again, in Office 365, it looks pretty good already. It's a lot better than it was back in SharePoint 2007. That looked terrible. The new modern Office 365 looks much better. But it's not just about the graphic design. That is a very small part of the aesthetics. What it looks like is part of that, but it goes far beyond that. What you need to do is, again, we go back to sort of the scoping and what are we trying to accomplish here. You need to work with those users to figure out for them what feels right to them. How does the solution going to fit into their workflow? How does it make them feel? What do they want it to do? How do they want it to flow? And if you do that, you're going to have much happier users, and they'll actually use the product, right? And you'll get that user adoption. Because I don't know about any of you, but I've created some really sick hot solutions that were complete failures. It did exactly what it needed to do. It worked brilliantly, but nobody ever used it, right? That means that solution was a failure. Technically, it was perfect, wasn't used, it was a failure. I did that job clearly, right? And having this sort of conversation with people, you can avoid that. Up in Joburg, one of my colleagues gave a talk on the different roles of designers in Office 365. And there's a bunch of different ones, right? So you have a graphical designer who does all the pretty, but you also have UX and UI designers, right? User experience designers. And all of those roles are very important when we're building our solutions. And there's a new one apparently that's sort of evolved out of all of this called an experiential designer or an experience designer. And they really look at how you design the experience that people have with your solutions. A lot of this has come out of sort of appification of everything, right? Everybody has, you want to pick up the app and you want it to be user-friendly and just sort of flow you through the process. The stuff we build is generally a bit more complicated than a normal app, but you can do that same thing. How do you bring those users into your app? What is their experience like, right? It should be a nice experience. If we make it hard for them, they're not going to use it, and we're going to fail, right? So that barrier also feeds into the aesthetics, right? It's got to look nice, it's got to feel nice, it's got to be usable. Cool? Not putting anybody to sleep yet. Okay. Sweet. Good design helps us to understand the products. So what do we mean here? So Mara said, a designer has to always be conscious, not just of what the product is, but of what its design says as an introduction. When somebody sees your product for the first time, it will be up to your product to convey that message. Right? We can build a great solution. I can even sit down with you and walk you through the whole thing, and then you'll feel very comfortable with it. But then I leave. I'm a consultant. I go to a company for 6 months to a year, then I leave. When I leave, somebody else is going to come into that company and have to pick up my system. I'm no longer there to talk them through it. That's a problem. If it's too complicated, if there's lots of weird corner cases, it's not going to be a good experience for them. Right? We must think about that as well when we talk about our design. So it's easy for us, IT pros, power users, IT managers. We've all been in this industry for a really long time, right? We've got experience. I know how to code. The people who are actually using our solutions do not have that wealth of experience. They don't know these systems. So the stuff we take for granted, they don't know. And that makes it makes the barrier to entry way higher. And again, that drops our adoption. Trace spoke in the keynote about digital literacy, right? How much time do we spend with those users showing them how to use a computer? You know, that's like the most basic level of thing, and then moving all the way up. When you're building your solution, we should bear that in mind. So our solution should be in some way designed to channel the user experience. If you do, and that's where our implementation is different from what Microsoft does, right? Microsoft say, here are the tools. Cool. It's then our job to say, okay, how do we implement that for our specific needs, my client-specific needs, my company-specific needs, in a way that makes sense, and I can take everybody on this journey together. Right? That's why me as a consultant has a job rather than Microsoft just saying, here you go. We've got to help the users along on this journey. And that can be in our solution design. Less buttons is generally better. But even when building SharePoint landing pages, anything like that, it's a good idea to be able to channel the users through it. Sound good? Sweet. Good design is unobtrusive. I hope you like my little ninja there. This ninjas are unobtrusive. Murray says he thinks, Dieter Rams's point here, is that all the elements have to serve the design first, and that's it. First and foremost, and no other thing. So the first point, every element has to serve the design. The designer's job is to look at the system as a whole, right? On the Office 365 space, it's much the same. No single solution we make, no single element, no single app that we ever make is bigger than the environment that we're working in, right? If I make a really sick, hot app that is in no way relates to anything else that the business is doing, that's not a very good app. That's not a well-designed app, right? The ideal is you could slip, if you were the perfect designer, you could design a product that would slip so seamlessly into the user's way of work that they wouldn't even notice. Right? They'd be just like, oh, cool, and carry on about their day and be using it all the time. That would be the perfect design. We can never actually get that. The stuff we do is more complicated than that, but you want to keep it as unobtrusive as possible. And you never want to warp the environment that you're working in to support your solution. When we start talking about different ways of work, that's a bit of a different thing, right? But we have to think about the entire system, right? So we have to keep the larger strategic requirements of the business in mind when we're building solutions. That can be as simple as I'm displaying a bunch of information. That information should probably come from a source system somewhere. Is it in SQL somewhere? Is it in wherever it is? I don't want to make a bunch more tables and then suddenly I'm duplicating data and somebody's job is to keep it up to date here and up to date here and up to date here. Like, that's horrifying. So if we can keep the whole system in mind, we'd be like, okay, well, I've got this information here and this information here, and I'm capturing this information. Let me save it somewhere where the next solution I build can also make use of those. So we want to keep that in mind. Does that make sense? Being unobtrusive. Good design is honest. This is a great one. I love this. So Mark says, things need to do what your audience expects them to do. Sure, being honest as a magic designer means taking all the steps necessary to have your card serve the vision. Right? Just going back to that vision, right? Our first point, second point, whatever it was, what's that function, right? Let's be honest about what that function is, build something that is honest to that function. So, the solution should do what users expect it to do. Sounds self-explanatory, okay? It's not though. Going all the way back to scoping, right? If you don't do the proper scoping, then you can't get that right. If you don't know what the user expects the system to do, there's no ways you can build a system that does what they expect it to do. Right? You've got to bring them into the process all the way at the beginning. And I'm not just talking about Exco. Exco is great, really important. You need their buy-in. They've got to drive it from the top. But if you do all of your scoping with the Exco and the divisional leads, like I'm building something for HR, let me go and speak to the head of HR. When you actually go deliver that to users, they'll be like, that's not how we work. Like, Sure, he thinks that's how we work, but actually we've got this corner case here, and oh no, that process doesn't work anything like that. That doesn't work. We just do it in email. You have to talk to the actual people who are actually using it, right, when you're building a solution. And you can then find out what they expect it to do, and you can then build your solution so that it's honest to them. I tell them it will do this, and it will do that. The nice thing, again, about us in Office 365 is we can be honest about it. The tools are legitimately really awesome. They do what they say on the tin. You can get it all done, which is not something that everybody in IT can say, by the way. When you're setting other projects and they say, can it do this? And you have to be like, yeah, sure. In Office 365, they really are cool. They really do. So, let's go back. Again, going back to that experience design, right? The UI, UX portion of it. If you present them with an interface that looks like it does a certain thing, it better actually do that certain thing. Right? They've got to have that honest feedback to it. And then clear communication. So that's about the actual design of the solution. Again, in the design of the solution, the clear communication is also very important. When you're done with it, you've got to document what you do. I know we all hate documentation. It sucks building documentation for a solution, but it's really important, right? We've got to be honest about, okay, I all that stuff that's commented out there, I don't know. This thing down here, I don't know why it works, but it does. So if it falls over, maybe look at that first, right? We need that clear communication so the next guy picking it up can do that. And when we're rolling these things out, right, even if we're just rolling out teams, we've done nothing custom in it, right? We're rolling out teams. We need that clear communication with the users we're rolling out to. Hi guys, this is what's happening, right? We're going to be rolling out teams. Here's what it does. Here's how you can use it. We're going to start with HR first. They're starting on the 1st. They'll be going until about the 10th, and then we're going to move over to finance. And you can tell the whole company this, and they can go like, okay, cool, how's that working? We're next week, aren't we excited? Right? Those clear communication channels and being honest about it. Like, guys, we screwed up with HR. Like, it didn't work. We're going back for another round. We think we've got it right? But if you keep that up to date, because there's nothing worse if you're a user in the business and like, oh, okay, this fucking process has been going on for 800 years. I don't know, like, what's happening with it. Did it work? Didn't it work? Oh, like, I suppose. And then they come in the next week and like, okay, we're doing it now. They're like, oh, I've got other work to do. And like, it becomes a bad experience. Right? With a little bit of communication, you can prep them for it and they can be excited for it. Because this technology is really exciting. It really is cool. Next one, good design is durable. Maro says, when I design a card, I think long term. Disposable things use disposable ideas. Classic things use timeless ideas. Right? So, obviously we want a design to be durable, right? We want it to be timeless. So what does that mean for Office 365? Well, it means we want to future-proof. I was pausing for the round of laughs. How do you future-proof something in Office 365, right? It's really difficult. Stuff changes all of the time, right? So how do you build something that is going to last a really long time? Well, there are things you can do. We can use out-of-the-box tools, right? We have a issue in the business that can be solved with out-of-the-box tools. We should use the out-of-the-box tools because they are likely to be supported longer in Office 365. As soon as you start doing something custom and you're using some like corner case API call or whatever, that gets deprecated, suddenly the whole thing falls over. So we can make it more durable by using out-of-the-box tools where we can. Best practice design. There are a lot of best practices, and we should build to those where we can, right? Sometimes the technology came out last week. There is no best practice for that technology. But, like, from experience, we do know some things, right? Our data should be in a controlled place. We have a lot of philosophical best practices. We know how to run projects. That can help. We know how to do scoping properly. That can help. We might not have the technical best practice, but we know a bunch of stuff. We know how we should name columns. We know we should do documentation, right? So that best practice is quite important. And then have a solution life cycle, right? Good design is durable. Durable doesn't mean it runs for the next 50 years. The days of a solution that will run in the business for 50 years, I hate to tell you this, gone. It's not going to work. So how do we deal with that? Well, has anybody ever done ECM, Enterprise Content Management, Records Management, anything like that? Yeah, a couple people. So one of the cornerstones of that, I've done a bunch of that, is the idea of a document life cycle. So I start a document, I create it, right? I open up Word and I create a document. That's the start of the document. At some point, I need to collaborate about it, so I share it with a bunch of people and we collaborate on it. So there's a collaboration part of the life cycle. Then at some point, it gets approved, so there's an approval part. Then it becomes a record, and nobody can edit it anymore. And then at some point, 10 years later, the lawyers say we don't need it anymore and we can dispose of it, and it gets deleted, right? And every company should have an ECM life cycle for all the stuff in their business, so you can control where the thing is and what it's doing. What I find fascinating is that works. I've been at companies where they have super strong records things, and they pay people to do this, and all of their documentation is controlled like that. As soon as you get into the IT department, it disappears. Because these systems should follow that exact same life cycle, right? This thing is not going to run for 50 years. How long do I expect it to run for? It's probably going to be viable for 5 years, maybe 10 years, depending on how you built it, right?
More like 6 months to a year.
Whatever the case is. That is a good point. Maybe we need this now, right? This is a stopgap solution. Our contracts are unmanaged. We need a spreadsheet or something where we can manage that. Okay, I can give you a SharePoint online list. Here you go. You can put in the information and upload the document. This is not the final product, but it will keep us going for the next 6 months while we scope out a proper system. So the life cycle for that solution is 6 months. What happens at the end of that? You should have a life cycle plan for your solutions. So, okay, we plan, we're going to take a year to dev this thing. It's then going to run for 5 to 10 years, and then it needs to be replaced, right? Maybe it just needs to be updated, or maybe it needs to be entirely replaced. But you should have a plan in place of, okay, after 8 years, we should re-examine this. And I'm a big fan of re-examining all the time. Agile methodology, I think, is really great. And that's constant iteration, right? We get in a minimum viable product, and then we re-engage with the stakeholders and say, cool, you're now using this thing. What else would you like? Okay, let's add that in. What else would you like? Add that in. And you have that constant life cycle of an app. But even that, at some point you have to say, okay, the technology we've based this on is now 10 years old. We need to start again. We've got all this learning already out of it. Let's translate that into a new technology. So that life cycle, I think, is quite important. So durable doesn't mean forever. Durable just means you need to have a plan for what that life cycle actually looks like. Cool. So we're going through this at a rate or not, so. Although I suppose, actually, I'm running out of time. Good design is consequent to the last detail. Marrow says, every facet of magic is going to be explored by someone. When they do, I want to have already been there. Little things matter to people. Little things matter because to people, little things matter. Right? That the detail orientation of these solutions is really important.
You can do orientation for people that play magic. Can they fight with the same card?
Oh yes, yeah. Like one of the things I love about being a nerd is having those real in-depth things. Magic's great. Comic books are also great. Like who would actually win in a fight between Superman and Batman? Well, you see, it depends. Like does Batman have prep time? All those sorts of things.
I've got another one for you. Who would win between Hulk and Wolverine?
That's not a bad one. I think they did that in the comics though. Anyway, so those little details really matter to people. And you can have you can have something that's functional, but is like iffy in one or two spots. And people will be like, meh. You know, the little details matter. And this goes, Again, all the way back to the scoping, right? What's that initial function? Everything should feed off that. So we need to be detailed in our scoping. What is it that the people want? And don't skimp on it. Don't talk just to the exco. Don't talk just to the manager. You have to talk to the people who actually do it. It's really hard to get time with those people because they're busy actually working. It's much easier to talk to their manager because he's not working. I mean, is it not true? I've recently transitioned into more of a, I'm not doing the actual physical work myself. I have to hand that off onto somebody else, and it sucks, but it does mean I have more time to have discussions about what's needed and stuff. So, but it's really important to get the detail of the people. What is the actual detail? How do you actually work? Same thing in development, right? The details are important. Name your variables correctly, right? Name your SharePoint columns correctly. You know, when you're doing technical documentation, have a template that you can do it the same way every time. Have a process, right? Process is really important. You can very seldom control the outcome of a project. There are too many variables that go into it. You can make the perfect system, do everything right. Client changes ownership at the last minute, and they don't like it, and you're balked, right? That's a failed project. But was it failed development? Not really. But you can't control that outcome. What you can control is the method, right? So if you concentrate on the detail of that method and you keep going through that, it can be really powerful. And again, talking way back, that experience design. Those little details matter. Is it consistent? Is that experience consistent across the whole app? Those little details matter. And then change management. I'm sure everybody's very tired of hearing about change management. People are going to keep talking about change management until it gets better, right? Exactly. Everybody does it very poorly. There's a very nerdy podcast I listen to, and they've got a t-shirt that says the wrestling will continue until morale improves. It's very much that same sort of thing. Like the change management will continue until people manage the change. So it's really, that's all about the details. Working with individual people, what do you need, how do you do it? All the way back to that functional design. Good design is concerned with the environment. I know we're in Cape Town. I'm not talking about the environment here. Mara says, each card lives in a context that the designer has to understand. Failure to do so will result in a set that doesn't hold together. So they've got 10,000 cards. They've got a set of 300 cards. Everything they build has to fit into that greater whole, right? And it's very much the same thing for us. No solution we ever built exists on its own. You never have complete green fields. Even if they've never had a computer in their business before, they still have processes, right? There's always something that you're dealing with, some environment you're dealing with. So that's, first of all, the Office 365 environment. You have to think about that. When I've got that function, right? What is that issue I'm solving for this business? We can then say, okay, in the environment, what best suits this function? Is it Teams? Is it Yammer? Is it Kaizala? Right? They're all similar products, but for this specific function, which one works better? Then we have a company environment, right? What's the corporate culture? I will tell you from my experience, working with a bank is very different than working with a graphic design firm. It's completely different. You have to do everything completely differently. With the bank, you have to be like, this is how we're doing it. There's 80,000 pages of spec. You go read it and get back to me. You go to the graphic design firm, they're like, I don't know, let's see how it goes. And you can be much more agile, be like, okay, let's do some wireframes and have that conversation. So it does depend. And if you're working within one company, it's very much the same thing. The finance department is very different from the sales department. It's very different from the HR department, right? You've got to sort of change it up depending on where you are. And then the environment of each process, right? I've got a sales process. I've got an onboarding process for my employees. I've got an offboarding process for my employees. What apps I use, all that sort of thing will also very much depend on what that environment is. So when we're building these solutions, when we're first concepting them, we have to keep all of that in mind. Happy days. Last one, and I think the coolest one and the hardest one, is good design is as little design as possible. So Maro said, instead of creating designs they need, designers create designs they can. Right? It's like that quote from Jurassic Park. You madmen were so busy trying to figure out if you could, you didn't stop to think if you should. Right? It's very much that sort of thing. We get super excited about all the cool new toys. I love the cool new toys. I really do. But maybe we don't need to use all of them at once. Good design has to look past what is possible for what is required. Right? Speaks all the way back to one of our first points there, which was about that function. What is the function of the solution? What are we trying to achieve? I can do all this massive stuff, but if I don't have to, should I? Right? So we shouldn't overcomplicate a solution. It's really easy to do that. And I'm still very much guilty of this. I want to put on all the bells and whistles. If out-of-the-box tools can solve a problem, we should use the out-of-the-box tools. Right? And they are very good. Simplicity in design makes development easier, makes training easier, makes adoption easier. Simplicity is the key. We want to do as little as possible. Problem is, that is the hardest design to do. Like the super minimalist, I'm doing basically nothing, but still having all of that function in it, and having it be a very simple interface, very simple algorithms that still come out with your result is possible. It's really, really hard. But we can try, right? We can minimize it as much as possible, make it as unobtrusive, right, as we talked about, as possible to the user. And that'll make it easier for us to admin, easier for us to improve. So those are the 10 principles, right? Way too far. Good design is innovative, right? We want to provide new experiences for our clients. Office 365, we've got lots of innovation. They are constantly giving us new stuff, which is great. But how do we translate that to our user base? Right? We want to give them something new. We want to use the new tools and the new experiences to improve their way of life with their existing processes. It makes a product useful, right? That function. What is the function of the thing? We always have to, and as we're going through, we constantly have to examine what is the function of this thing? Is it still accomplishing that function? It's aesthetic, right? It looks good and it feels good, right? Not just about the graphic design, it's about the UI, the UX, the experience design. How is the person using my solution actually going to interface with it? What's that experience? Good design helps us to understand a product, right? Keeping in mind the people that we're giving our solution to don't know how to code. They don't know you have to do that squiggly little thing on the side. They've maybe never used SharePoint before. What does this look like to them? Can we guide them through that process? And a lot of that is digital literacy, right? Training, making that available to people. It's like Content Panda. Makes that stuff easier. Good design is unobtrusive, right? We don't want to be too in our face about everything. The perfect scenario would be it just slots into their work week and they never even notice it and they're using it and they're like, oh, that's really cool. Very difficult to actually get there, but we can get as close as we can, right? Good design is honest. Always be honest. In your design, in your scoping, with yourself, like, oh, this code is really cool. Just don't worry about all the things down there. It's fine. It helps a lot. And if you can bring the people in right on the onset, right? Say, how are we doing this? Here's our plan. Then they're on board on the journey with you, and they'll be far less resistant when it comes to the time to actually implement it, because they've been a part of it, and they know everything that's gone into it. Good design is durable, right? As much as we can in Office 365. We have a product life cycle that we can make sure that this is maintained going forward. Like that the company can trust in the fact that even if this specific one we're doing now isn't in operation in 20 years, this one will lead into the next one because we've got a plan for that. Good design is consequent to the last detail. Everything we do is detail orientated, and somebody's going to find all those different details. So make sure you concentrating on that. It's concerned with the environment. Where are we working? Am I working with finance? Am I working with HR? What is the rest of the environment of my business like? And then good design is as little design as possible. So we want to try slimline it, keep it simple for the users, for us, for everybody. So those are the 10 design principles. Anybody want to have a chat about those? I hope that was fun. Yeah?
Yeah, speaking of fun. So how do you make it fun?
How do you make it fun? Well, fun for the end users. There is a bunch of sort of gamification kind of stuff you can do. I think, so for Magic, their core function is fun. For what we do, the core function is not fun. The core function is productivity or whatever it is. And on a solution by solution basis, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And you have to go back to that. You can make it fun. You need a good copywriter to do that communication. Like, keep it upbeat and entertain people. Like, you've got to cult of personality, basically, is how you make it fun. But you can do gamification too. Like Graph API, right? You can get a count of how many documents has a guy uploaded, how many messages has he sent on Teams, stuff like that. And you can make games out of that. If you are doing that, a big part about gamification, though, is in games require hard data. I have had X many turns, I did so much damage. You need hard quantifiable data, and then you can put thresholds on it and give people prizes and whatever. If you really want to do gamification, the first step you have to do is you have to have the data of what people actually do. Yeah. Cool. I think everybody's waiting for me to shut up and move on to the next session.